And I think that one of the reasons Barack Obama was able to kind of take a lead he was never going to give up was, even though he was the younger person, the less experienced person classically, he looked calm. Famously on the day McCain said he was going to suspend his campaign, Barack Obama said a president has to be able to learn to do more than one thing at a time. And then, there was the meeting at the White House that McCain pushed Bush to have with all the congressional leaders. McCain did not perform well there. Obama did. Kind of that performance delta leaked out. But for us, what was interesting, you're running a presidential campaign, which is hard enough. And then you have, really from September 15th on, things were deteriorating prior to Lehman. But during that period, in a way, the presidential campaign almost came secondary. And also from a candidate standpoint, Barack Obama was talking to Hank Paulson every night. He was talking to economic experts. So, this doesn't matter to people, right? But to us, it really made it harder. But, you just didn't know what the next day would bring. And I think that's where we're here. And listen, you see, we obviously hope for the best in terms of Trump's response to this and our government officials' response. But when he tweets out today on Monday, trying to basically say, hey, the flu kills a bunch of people. Why are people freaking out? We know what's behind that. The only thing this man cares about is himself. And for the first time, on Friday when he was down in Georgia, he didn't look good physically or obviously the crazy stuff he said. And I think it's because he's not concerned about the number of cases or deaths or even the market. He's concerned about his political life. And, this is the first time Trump cannot really spin his own alternative facts and version of events. Pretty soon, unfortunately, we're going to know people who've lost jobs, who've been affected economically, who've gotten the virus. And that's going to fly in the face of him saying, everything's fine. Don't look over here. We've got it all under control. And so that's the other thing. We saw with Katrina, with President Bush, that's really when, the public lost faith and confidence in him. One of the things that's damaging, Preet, is our presidential campaigns are not covered the way the presidency unfolds, right? It's all like who's got this policy idea and who's likely to get 51 votes for it. But at the end of the day, that's all important. Most of what comes into that building, you weren't planning for. And at its most basic level, what the American people expect is regardless of the politics, regardless of the inconvenience, they want you to be on top of crisis. And, so far we're a few days into this in terms of Trump really taking the ship of state. And it's probably one of the historically worst performances we've ever seen.
Because for among other reasons, you can't, mock the coronavirus. You can't belittle the coronavirus. You can't give it a silly, dumb nickname. And you can't bully the coronavirus. And other people have been making this point. It is what it is. And it's a medical thing. It's not an opponent about which you can spin, fables and yarns. And he doesn't know how to do it. Remember, as recently as a week or two, I lose track of time because everything moves so fast. When there was the first big stock market dip, I think he said, that's because the public finally got to look at who the Democratic nominees might be because there was a debate. Right. Well, I don't think there was any debate last night. So it's a downhill rhetorical slide for him. I want to go back to 2008 for a second, see if there are other lessons to be wrung from that. You talked about this meeting that Bush had with both candidates, Obama and McCain. And I remember that. And I talked to somebody who was there. And you say that the reports of the Delta became known. Part of what I remember hearing was in the difference between the performances of Obama and McCain was not one of knowledge or expertise, but one of temperament. Mm-hmm. That Obama seemed, and I think, became a president of this type as well, sort of calm and collected, no drama Obama. And McCain was kind of fiery and, a little, dramatic. Is that fair? And do you think that mattered?
Oh, I think temperament for sure, though I think McCain's grasp of both the problem and the solutions was also lacking. I almost feel bad saying this given, how much we all still love so much about John McCain, but it's just the truth. The other thing was it was an unusual meeting because George W. Bush, I remember Josh Bolton, who was Bush's chief of staff, calling me somewhat sheepishly, saying we kind of have to do this meeting. He didn't come out and say it, but reading between the lines, it's like he's our nominee and he wants to have the meeting. So this was not a meeting Bush called. This was McCain saying we all need to go back to Washington and do what's right and put this ahead of politics. But he was, you had the Republican leadership for the House and Senate there, but they kind of designated McCain as their spokesperson and leader of that meeting. And, the Democrats did the same for Barack Obama. And McCain, didn't say much, was not really focused on driving to a solution. So I think people saw through that it was a stunt. But, the other thing I'd say about that is, people were not supportive of a bailout. The easier politics for us would have been to say, hey, there's a Republican president in office. They've completely messed this out and they need to clean it up. And I think Barack Obama deserves a lot of credit because we didn't even have a conversation about what the right thing to do. It was so clear that we were literally on the precipice. And so that's the other thing I think that's a good reminder of is when presidents are faced with crises like this, the last thing you can do is think about your own politics. You just can't do it. And I know that a lot of people believe that can't be true, that everything these people do is politics. But there is a difference. I've worked on Capitol Hill in senior leadership positions with a lot of local government officials, and local government officials, as you know, do have to handle crisis. But in Washington, it is the executive branch always, no matter whether the politics are good or bad, it's the right time or the wrong time. You've got to be the one that can't just posture in position. You just got to deal with it. And that's the other thing that concerns me about Trump is no matter what you Democrat, Republican presidents for pretty much the entire, history of the country with a couple of exceptions have operated in that way. And Trump, obviously, from day one, when on the day he was, put his hand on the Bible and gave that dark speech, he opened up his presidential reelection campaign. But we see now the terror in his eyes and the terror in his tweets is not for any of us. It's just for him. And I think that is going to be revealed for all to see. And I think he could be heading to a pretty dark place politically.
Did you have a sense back in September of 2008, either at the time or in retrospect, that the inflection point that was sort of negative, and it was quite negative for the country, was for good or ill, ended up being positive for the Obama campaign? And then I want to ask you, in parallel, what effect do you think the crisis of the last few days will have on the trajectory of this race?
Well, back in 2008, so Lehman was September 15th, I believe, or September 14th. And there was a 2-week period then before that, really dark Monday and the first presidential debate, which is another thing where McCain says, I might skip the debate because we all have to be focused on, the financial crisis. And, Obama said there's no more important time for the American people to see us because one of us is going to win and have to handle this because clearly it's going to be something that's going to be with us for a number of years. So the crisis itself, probably added a little bit of sense that we needed change. But it really was the performance of the two candidates. And that first debate, as you might recall, was centered on foreign policy. Obviously, we started the debate talking about the financial crisis. So it's like, well, here's the young senator who seems calmer, who's trying to reassure us, who seems to be putting politics second, and then he wins the event that should have been McCain's strongest event, the debate on foreign policy. So it was those 2 weeks, I think, where people really, for the first time, saw Barack Obama fully as someone who could sit in the Oval Office, sit in the Situation Room, go to the United Nations, and they saw him as a president, which now seems we kind of take it for granted. But, voters still had concern back there. They liked him. They thought he was new. They thought he had changed. But was this too big of a gamble? And then you add Palin's selection to that. McCain became the reckless and the risky choice, and Obama became the safe choice. I don't know yet where the politics go on Trump, and I think that should be secondary in all of our thoughts. But, we see his approval ratings. We know that, the only thing holding him up into the 40s is a statistically healthy economy, although there's lots of people that don't feel great about their own economic situation. So any kind of, sustained hit to the economy, I think will hurt him. But I think what will hurt him even more is just the way he's behaving. I mean, that tweet today where he's basically like, I don't understand it. We have a lot more flu cases, a lot more flu deaths, and people aren't freaking out. I mean, that will be part of American history now, a dark part of American history, because presidents just don't act this way. He is not up to this moment. And, this is going to get a lot worse before it gets a lot better. And, I think he can't bluster his way out. But, if nothing else, the American people want to know their president's got it, whether they support the person or not, whether they despise the person or not. At those moments, you want to know they've got it. And this guy is about the most unstable presence we've ever seen in that office.
So when we think about the other side of the political coin, on the Democratic side, you're Joe Biden or you're Bernie Sanders. Put yourself in the position of being on their campaign. What are you saying behind the scenes about how they should address the issue, how they should distinguish themselves from each other, not just from Trump? What's the strategy here?
It's a really interesting question, Preet. So hearkening back to 2008, we still in Barack Obama in interviews in town halls and in speeches, as the economic crisis got worse, would talk about, healthcare in Iraq and bringing about change in core elements of our campaign. But, you had to really start and emphasize with where the country was, which is, let me tell you where I think we are and what we need to do about it. And so I think Sanders and Biden both need to understand that what Democratic primary voters, much less the American people, are concerned about is what's going on with the coronavirus and what are we going to do about it and how it affects us. So we're talking Monday. I saw that Joe Biden did an interview with MSNBC. Bernie Sanders talk about free vaccines. That's good. I mean, I'd actually like to see both of them really kind of narrate Trump's response to this every day and critique it when it's worth critiquing, and remind people, what someone who's stable and smart and selfless would do. I think it's a real opportunity. It's too early to know, so we're recording this Monday. We've got some big primaries in our debate on Tuesday night. But there have been some polls to suggest that Democratic primary voters view Biden, maybe not unsurprisingly, because he served as vice president, as the person they would trust most in a crisis. So, just as we've seen in the markets, a flight to safety, I think there may be an increasing flight to safety in politics. So I think this is set up exceedingly well for Joe Biden to be a calm voice for people so that people can see that actually there's a lot of things we should be doing that we're not doing. Also, I think that will drive Trump crazy, which I'm not wild about as a citizen, but it's probably good politics.
I'm not running for anything, but I've been getting more angry lately, seeing the ineptitude of the response and the lying about this when we're talking about life and death and the minimizing of it. I went on a Twitter rant yesterday, but I'm a private citizen, and I think that's okay every once in a while. Do the Democratic candidates have to be careful about how they critique the president? Can they be too forceful? Can they be too meek?
Well, I think when he deserves critique, both for the response to date and obviously comments like he's made today that are so deeply irresponsible, he deserves harsh and frequent critique. When he's doing something well, like Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, actually said he's been pretty satisfied with his discussions with the federal government over the cruise ship. So that's fine. Like, we need to call balls and strikes here fairly. I don't think we should just get in the mindset of we're going to critique everything he does or his administration does, and when they do something smart, not praise that. So no, the health and safety of the American people and our economy need to be front and center. But I don't think he's going to change, right? I mean, this is who he is. And I think the panic that is emerging in him is going to make him behave even more irrationally. There's going to be days where almost all of his administration and Republicans in Congress are saying one thing and he's saying the other. And one question I have is, when does Fox News turn?
Well, will they? I don't know. Look, I've been talking to people, some of them on the right and some of them who know people who are Trump supporters. And I wonder, how are the Trump supporters reacting to the president's performance on this? And I'll tell you, a lot of them still, as recently as Saturday or Sunday, when we're recording on Monday, they take the view that, yeah, this is, overblown. People are panicking. There are some Democrats they claim are rooting for the coronavirus to spread. They're rooting for a recession. You have, a stand-up comedian who has a television show who specifically rooted for a recession so that you can get rid of Trump. And so they view all of this through the lens of, time and time again, the Democrats said, this is a disaster or that's a disaster, whether you're talking about the Russian investigation or you're talking about Ukraine or you're talking about the killing of Soleimani in Iran. And all these terrible things never came to pass. And here's another example of that. Will that break?
Well, I think, first of all, the most important actor will be our nominee. And listen, this primary could end up wrapping up sooner than any of us thought a couple of weeks ago, right? So if it is Joe Biden, he's going to narrate kind of what the Democrats think about this and how to handle this. And, he's not rooting for a recession, and I think he'll be sober in how he approaches this. So I think that will be helpful, because I do worry a little bit about that. But I do think those, it shouldn't have been the case, but, whether it was Ukraine, so many things that happens in administration, Charlottesville, where, he did get some criticism, but they've stayed unified behind him. At the very least, I think you're going to see people saying he needs to take it easy with the tweeting. And I saw a little commentary from some conservatives today about this, like what he did today was not helpful.
Right.
But I think, to your point, the reality here trumps the alternative reality he likes to create. And so if the economy continues, right now we're obviously seeing it in the markets, but when it hits the real economy, and you begin to see layoffs and you begin to see people getting less hours, and somebody who's a conservative knows somebody who lost their job, or maybe they did, I think they're going to take it a lot more seriously, or people who've been sick. So again, I think the reality here, healthcare was always interesting in politics because everybody's a healthcare consumer, right? And so everybody's got a stake in what's happening with the coronavirus. I think there's a lot of